Welcome back to The Explainer. A modern high-producing dairy cow or a commercial flock of chickens, they aren't just accidents of nature. They are highly tuned biological machines. Today, we are unpacking the blueprints driving the animal world. We're going to look way beyond basic genetics to see how humans have harnessed that science through animal breeding to fundamentally shape our global food supply. So here's a quick roadmap for today's Explainer. We'll start with genetics versus breeding, then decode the vocabulary of inheritance, break down genotypes and phenotypes, look at animal variation, and finally finish up with the immense economic power of selection. Let's dive in. All right, part 1, genetics versus breeding, blueprint versus construction. Think of genetics as, well, studying an architectural blueprint, right? While breeding is the actual construction of the building. Animal genetics is the foundational science. It's the strict study of heredity and variation. Animal breeding takes those rules and puts them to work in the real world. Basically, the geneticist figures out the rules of the game, while the breeder leverages those rules to win. And for a breeder, winning literally means economic improvement. We aren't just making changes for aesthetics here. We're talking about massive, tangible gains. Just to put that into perspective, thanks to dedicated breeding, the average modern dairy cow produces more than double the milk her 1960s counterpart did. Whether it's maximizing egg production or boosting meat yield, the breeder is using genetic science to totally optimize highly valuable characteristics. Moving right along to Section 2, the vocabulary of inheritance. Let's decode some of this jargon. When we speak the language of breeding, our primary target is the trait. As you probably already know, this is the specific characteristic passed down from parent to offspring, something like milk yield or coat color. It's the ultimate endpoint we're trying to manipulate. Beneath that trait, you've got the gene. This is the foundational blueprint, the absolute smallest unit of inheritance, dictating what actually gets expressed. And in the biological world, these genes always operate in pairs. But since they occur in pairs, they don't always carry the exact same instructions. So, enter the allele, the alternative form of a gene. If the gene is the broad category, say eye color, the allele is the specific option, brown or blue. It's the vital variation within the code. All of this vocabulary essentially culminates in heredity, which is simply the transmission of these traits dictated by those genes and their specific alleles from the parents down to the offspring. It's the passing of the genetic baton from one generation to the next. Section 3. Genotypes and phenotypes, the hidden and the seen. Now, when these alleles interact, power isn't exactly shared equally. Just as a quick refresher, the dominant allele is the stronger of the two, totally masking the presence of the recessive one. That recessive allele just patiently waits in the genetic background, unless it happens to get paired with another recessive allele. Which brings us to the genotype. This is the invisible internal coding, the absolute genetic makeup of the individual. You can't see a genotype with the naked eye, but finding and securing the best genotypes is the entire point of an animal breeding program. It's what it's all about. And those genetic combinations usually fall into two familiar camps. You've got homozygous, which involves two identical alleles, giving us a pure individual. And then you have heterozygous, featuring mixed dominant and recessive alleles. Those are our hybrids. Now contrast that invisible genotype with the phenotype. This is the physical feature you actually see. If the genotype is the architectural blueprint, the phenotype is the finished house. It's the actual horns on a cow. A breeder observes the phenotype, sure, but they are constantly fighting to manipulate that hidden genotype. Section 4. Animal variation, the spice of life. Variation is literally the raw material of breeding. It's the simple fact that no two individuals are exactly alike. Even identical twins have slight differences due to environmental factors. If every single cow produced the exact same amount of milk, genetic progress would be impossible. Variation is what makes any kind of improvement possible. And this variation is acted on in a couple of ways. Natural selection is your classic survival of the fittest. The environment dictates success. But artificial selection, that's human-driven. This is where the breeder steps in, completely overrides nature's priorities, and decides exactly who reproduces based entirely on what is economically useful to us. Which brings us to Section 5, the power of selection and how we're shaping the future. When breeders are targeting just one single trait, they've got quite an arsenal of methods. They might use mass selection based purely on the animal's own phenotype. But if a trait takes years to show up, they might rely on pedigree selection to look at ancestors, or family selection to look at relatives. And for the ultimate proof of genetic worth, they'll use progeny selection, actually waiting to see how the animal's offspring perform. But let's be real, agriculture is rarely about just one trait. When juggling multiple goals, breeders have to get sophisticated. They might use tandem selection to fix one trait at a time, or set independent culling levels with strict minimums across the board. But the absolute gold standard? The selection index. This assigns a complex mathematical value to various traits based on their real-world economic weight. It rolls the whole shebang into one definitive score to rank the absolute best animals. To wrap this whole thing up, let's look back at a core definition from our source material. Animal breeding refers to the application of the principles of animal genetics for the improvement of economically important characteristics. We've journeyed all the way from microscopic alleles to complex mathematical selection indices, but it all loops back to this one practical goal: hacking biology to secure the resources we rely on every single day. So I'm going to leave you with this thought. The next time you see a farm animal, you won't just see its physical phenotype, right? You'll know there is a meticulously curated genetic blueprint operating right beneath the surface. As technology advances from traditional breeding into direct genomic selection and gene editing, we have to ask ourselves, how far can we actually push these biological blueprints before we hit the limits of nature? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.